From the makers of God's Hate by God's Hate, off God's Hate comes the same guy that debuted for All Elite Wrestling last night. I'm Dan Frampton. Let's talk about Brody King. Okay, Brody King is the lead singer, the vocalist, the front man for a band in the hardcore scene called God's Hate. They just put out a record in 2021 called God's Hate with an amazing song on it called God's Hate. And that kind of captured my imagination when all that went down. And plus, he's just like the toughest looking dude around. But if I'm being honest with you, I know this guy more so from the wrestling world. He's kind of built his whole character around this whole Bruiser Brody character from way back in the day. And I'm not sure if he built his whole character around the concept of Bruiser Brody as much as he was just inspired by Bruiser Brody. If I looked like the guy from God's Hate, I'd want to be Bruiser Brody too. But where I was first introduced to him was in ROH, where he was part of what they called the Villain Enterprises, led by this guy named Marty Scurll. Remember that name? We're going to be talking about that name in a little bit. But here he is right here. This is his big debut. This is when I first learned about him. This is so sick. The lights go off. They come back up. What's going to happen? Is it going to be a big attack? It is going to be a big attack because this is Villain Enterprises. And boom, there it is. There's the big attack.
Brody King beats you.
Brody King just making a huge elimination there. So sick. But he went on to wrestle for other organizations like Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, where he tag teamed with this guy named Tommy End. That's another name you're going to want to remember for later. They called themselves the Kings of the Black Throne. Now, there hasn't been a cooler fucking tag team name or band name ever since. That's so dope. He would also wrestle in MLW. Here he is doing a fucking parking lot attack in this amazing studded vest, looking so badass. He would wrestle all over the place for all the different independent promotions, mostly collecting tag team gold. But in the AEW, he was the world champion. Sami Callihan wasn't gonna have any of that. Anyway, they had a great match and a great feud, but an even greater match and a greater feud from this guy came from a match against Walter, who is the biggest, who is the beefiest, who is the strongest wrestler going right now, who I actually think had the match of the year last year. And this contest that these guys had against one another is one for the ages, had the people on their feet. And then, a couple years went by, and then COVID happened. So ROH, the company that these guys all worked for, they kind of slowed things down a little bit, shut down a couple sectors of their organization, kind of like they had to. But while that all happened, there was a thing called the Speaking Out movement, which is very similar to Hollywood's Me Too movement, and all the wrestlers got outed for being fucking dirtbags. And Marty Scurll, the leader of the Villain Enterprises, which was the faction that had Brody King in it, got called out. But I don't want to get into all the drama, but he's a disgusting piece of crap. So he got super canceled, of course. But where did that leave Brody King? Well, it turns out it didn't matter, because ROH was like, I guess we're shutting down operations, and they just released all their wrestlers. And when the big ROH releases happened, everybody was like, where is Brody King gonna go? Because he kind of was the standout star of that organization. Sure, there's the Jay Lethals of the fucking group, but we didn't really care about that. When he showed up, I was like, yeah, whatever, Jay Lethal, we've seen him before. But Brody King came to AEW last night to reform that group with Tommy End, who's now known as Malachi Black. And there he is, look at that huge fucking hauler, cannonball. But there he is with Tommy End, reforming the Kings of the Black Throne. Absolutely beautiful. I think it's gonna be called the Kings of the Black Throne in AEW too, which is pretty rad that they're gonna be carrying over the same name. Really fucking dope. So that brings us back full circle to this hardcore band, God's Hate. This is the stuff that I cover on this channel, and this is why we're talking about all this today. I'm not necessarily a hardcore news channel, but when this dropped, it was just like the coolest thing that happened in the scene in a long time, and I felt like, I gotta talk about this stuff. But is God's Hate gonna continue on now that he's got a huge contract with one of the biggest wrestling organizations in the world? And I say, yes, they still will be a band, and I'm very excited for what it means for them as a band. Because if you don't know, Andy from Every Time I Die is also signed to All Elite Wrestling under the name The Butcher, and he still tours with his band, and his band is much bigger than fucking God's Hate. And there's also Chris Jericho, who's also in a band, who also tours and does a whole bunch of other stuff. So I think the company that he's working for is going to allow him to be in the band, and he's going to use this newfound money to do cooler things with the band. I'm very stoked for God's Hate. I'm very stoked for Brody King in AEW. The future for both Both of them look so sick. And him and Tommy End in AEW is gonna be one of the coolest acts on the show. Thank you so much for watching this video. You know, I respond to every single comment. So, as a challenge, you guys should all comment something like 10,000 times. Okay, and while you're doing that, watch more of my videos.